Right, I think we can get started. So hello everyone and welcome to the webinar about unlocking opportunity through the European Space Agency. I'm Alexis Gizikis, project manager at ENA, and I will be hosting this webinar. Our speaker today, Christopher Frost Testfay, will introduce the Business Applications and Space Solutions program of the European Space Agency. ESA Space Solutions have invested 250 million euros in more than 1,200 businesses that use space technology and data to solve challenges on Earth. So in this webinar, we'll explore the opportunities available under the ESA programs. And more specifically, we will hear about who can benefit, what are the prerequisites, and the range of activities that the program covers, with some examples which are related to safety and security. Christopher is a space applications engineer at the European Space Agency, implementing the Business Applications Space Solutions program, which enables businesses to launch new commercial services by harnessing space data and technology. Christopher has overseen the analysis and demonstration of over 50 space-enabled services for infrastructure, mobility, energy, and many more. And after this short intro, we are almost ready to start. Just a few notes before I hand over to Christopher. So as usually, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the EENA website very soon, together with the slides that will be used during the webinar. There will be some time for questions and answers after the presentation. But in the meantime, if you have any question, please feel free to write it either in the Q&A box or the chat box. And I will address all questions that have been asked to Christopher after his presentation. Just to also add that, as you see on the slide which is displayed, translated captions are also available, and you can find the instructions on how to use them on your screens. So without any further delay, I will now hand over to Christopher. Christopher.
Thank you, Alexis. Let me try and share my screen.
Yep.
And you can let me know if it's coming through okay.
Yeah, we see the slides very well, Christopher.
All right, perfect. And yeah, thank you again for the great introduction. As said, my name is Christopher Frost Testfay. I work on a program that you can see here called Business Applications Space Solutions at ESA. And essentially, this is a program that tries to help companies, European companies, create commercially sustainable services that use space assets, any of satellite communication, satellite positioning, satellite Earth observation, and beyond. And I'm going to get into that in a moment. And as Alexis said, the way this will sort of be broken down is kind of a bit of background around ESA, around the program, and then a bit more looking a bit more at the domain that you guys, I think, operate in, which is to do with emergency response and preparedness and what we've done in that domain. So thank you again for your time and taking the time to listen. Very, very briefly, again, I work as a space applications engineer, or technical officer, as we're called internally. And I basically am tasked with trying to decide what activities to run in space applications activities, and then overseeing the activities, whether they're demonstration projects or feasibility studies, with a view towards creating these commercial services that I mentioned. And I've been doing this for quite a few years now in pretty much every domain you can think of, whether mobility, whether finance or maritime, and emergency response. So a bit of background about ESA for those who are less familiar. ESA is the European Space Agency. It is what we see as Europe's gateway to space. The goal is basically the peaceful exploration and use of space to benefit citizens in Europe and the world itself. It's been operating for since 1975, and the way that ESA works is that it's essentially made up of 22 core member states. They're the ones who provide the funding to ESA, but these are 22 European well, let's say agencies, ministries, space agencies, ministries of science, transport, where they don't have space agencies. And again, they provide the budget to ESA to run our programs. But we also work with other European and non-European states with different kind of modalities, depending on their interest as well. In terms of locations, we have sites across Europe. The HQ is in Paris. We also have sites in the UK, Belgium. Holland is the technical centre for the main technical centre for ESA. And we have a spaceport in French Guiana as well that deals with actually launching satellites. And yeah, ultimate goal, promote European scientific and industrial interests in space. Now, ESA's work is quite broad. It can be, I think, broken down into, for public narrative, it can be broken down broadly into these four pillars. Let's say the first, science and exploration, which is pretty much what you might think of when you think about space as a whole. Mars rovers, the International Space Station, fundamental physics. And then you have enabling and support, which is everything that kind of underpins that and more. So launch capability, operating satellites in space, R&D work as well, research and development. We have safety and security now as well, which is everything to do with protecting us from natural hazards, natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, and so on, or detection, prevention, etc. Cybersecurity as well, space debris, this emerging problem of larger quantities of material accumulating in space. So that's another focus topic for safety and security. And then finally, you have applications as well. So this is everything else that you can do with satellite technology to benefit our lives on Earth. And that's really where my department and my program sits. So ESA Space Solutions, pretty much the largest space innovation network in the world at this point, focuses on applications, supporting these companies developing these novel space applications, and particularly with a focus on commercial applications. So the pillar was applications, but really narrowing down into commercialization. And we support these companies, again, creating these commercial services that deliver an added value and showcase that how space can improve life on Earth. So it's really not just about Mars rovers, colonizing Mars, going to the moon, and so on. Great, but it's also that satellite technology is pretty much fundamental to the way we live our lives and can really enrich our lives as well. Now, when I talk about space applications in all of these different domains, we're really talking about every market. We run a program, as Alexis mentioned before, that's invested quite large sums of money into these activities, and they've spanned every different market, from financial applications to applications in aviation, maritime, healthcare, transport, and so on. With the exception of kind of military, we don't really touch military applications on the program. And when we talk about space, we're again talking about, well, the usual suspects: satellite communications, satellite positioning, satellite Earth observation, and we'll touch on those in the next slide. But it doesn't really stop there. If companies come to us with an idea that uses solar monitoring satellites for an application on Earth, maybe it's supporting communications in aviation by looking at space weather and so on. Maybe it's something else. We can consider it. If there's a company who has an idea to do with technology that was developed for human spaceflight, and they have an idea for how that can be used here on Earth, we'll also look at that as well. Now, very quickly, just an overview of what you can actually do with space technology. For example, there are many capabilities. If we look at just satellite positioning, probably the one that's most known to the average citizen. It can go anywhere from very utilization of very basic positioning information for applications like Uber and I don't know, Deliveroo and this kind of thing, all the way through to very precise positioning for surveillance in construction and beyond, or or even supporting navigation of autonomous vehicles, these kind of things. And then you can have more creative uses of satellite positioning as well, like companies who are aggregating lots of positioning data from road traffic to create a digital twin of road traffic networks to enhance safety of our roads. And then there's navigating drones. Lesser well-known GNSS satellites have very precise timing and time signaling, and so you can use that for precision timing for things like synchronizing energy networks. The list is really endless, and we're very much getting surprised every time we read a new proposal. So that's satellite positioning. SATCOM, the main three areas that this can help is providing connectivity where it's not economical to deploy cellular infrastructure or other infrastructure. And so essentially providing connectivity in remote areas, rural areas at sea and so on. It's also useful as a backup to cellular infrastructure when it gets taken down. Many of you probably have operated in emergency scenarios where potentially the cellular infrastructure is either overwhelmed or has, in a disaster scenario, really been taken offline. And in those areas, satellite can potentially offer a really strong added value. And it's worth to say that with new providers coming onto the market, the price point and the quality, we expect the price point to come down and the quality to go up. And then more broadly, just as providing a redundant link, satellite communications can be useful. Earth observation, this is everything to do with monitoring the planet. If it's taking place on the planet and it's of a certain size, and Earth observation may be able to support you in actually monitoring, analyzing what those events, potentially combined with other technologies being used to predict events. Things like detecting, changes could be to do with analyzing vegetation, weather forecasting. We've had companies doing, whale population surveys, analyzing how cities are developing over time, all with, end user requirements being met in mind. And then finally, human spaceflight tech. This can be anything from, patented anomaly detection algorithms for satellite telemetry being spun out into, healthcare parameter modeling. It can be many other things. It could be robotics that's been designed for space, and so on. Very, very quickly, just to kind of give an idea of where things are going. So this is kind of a graph on the right of the number of active satellites in orbit since inception, so since Sputnik, the very first satellite. And you can see this kind of the steady trend up until just a few years ago, where it kind of went exponential, largely because of these new low Earth orbiting satellite communications constellations. But I think if you kind of consider the general trend, that it's not just that. There are a lot more Earth observation providers and beyond entering the market as we see this kind of influx of new will and new funding and partially maybe enabled by the lower cost of launch as well, with reusable rockets and so on. So a lot more infrastructure in space, a lot more capabilities in turn, and yeah, very excited to see how this can impact the what we call the downstream, the applications in future. And so, yeah, some of the things we're going to see: cheaper satellite connectivity, rather we're already seeing to some extent, synergies with non-space tech. If there are parallel advances in machine learning and AI, and we take those and apply those to the new Earth observation capabilities, new imagery, what are the new things that we can actually ascertain from analyzing that imagery? What can we enable? Higher resolution Earth observation data in terms of the detail that you can tell apart from the imagery or the data, and the revisits, the temporal resolution. As there's more stock in space, we expect more capabilities to actually image the same areas on the ground more frequently. And then other things like accessibility. These guys have a profit motive. They need to make the solutions accessible. So we expect, and it's already happened with Starlink. If you compare that to, Starlink is very, very, very user friendly and beyond. So what are we actually looking for specifically on the program? we basically look at kind of three main elements when we take apart a proposed solution. So we want solutions that solve clear pain points of end users, and that's evidenced by customer engagement. We want to support companies who are either going to, well, we want to support companies to build technology that works well and has a clear added value offered by space tech and data. And ultimately, we want to support companies in developing solutions that are commercially viable, so that they have a concrete business case that checks out. And the way we support companies in doing this is manifold. So one is through zero equity funding. I think that's the kind of core of the offering. We don't take any equity. We provide fully funded or co-funded contracts where ESA puts in a certain amount. The company bidding puts in a certain amount of funding to implement a study or a project to kind of see their service, either assess the service viability or demonstrate the solution and eventually go to market. But we also have some other things that we offer, things like supporting project management aspects to the companies that need that support, technical support, business support, access to our network of partners, which goes from end users in the markets through to other service providers and beyond. And then also we get reports that working with us at ESA can support, it can open doors elsewhere as well. So that's kind of the offer, let's say, on our side. Now, in terms of the framework, we have two kind of ways of working. One is through direct negotiation and the other through invitations to tender, and they have like different nuances. I think the key aspects or the key thing to keep in mind is direct negotiation is very much industry driven. It's driven by the service providers, by industry. They can come with their ideas, they can define the scope, the cost. They have a bit more freedom to devise what the activity they want to pursue for their own kind of commercial end. And within that framework, we can do demonstration projects and feasibility studies. Feasibility studies are exploratory activities where you have done maybe some validation, you've got a strong idea, but there's some technical aspects or some economic aspects that you're not quite sure about, that you need to do a little bit of maybe prototyping, preliminary testing, or some desk-based analysis to figure out whether it actually makes sense. A bit more user engagement, perhaps. We have the studies for that that are available through direct negotiation, with the demo projects, which are sort of a logical continuation of feasibility studies. So once you've validated the economic and technical viability, you can go and develop and demonstrate the solution through a pilot demonstration with end users, testing the solution, giving you some feedback, measuring the key performance indicators before you try and take the thing to market. So those are the tools available via direct negotiation. We have invitations to tender as well, and this is mainly oriented around feasibility studies. Kickstarter is a different flavor of feasibility study. It's a smaller contract, but very much the same kind of scope of work, exploring the idea. And beyond that kind of breakdown, the funding rates may differ depending on direct negotiation, invitation to tender. If it's an invitation to tender, it's usually ESA driven. We've actually defined the scope of the work to be done. The budget is fixed, the timeline is often fixed, whereas direct negotiation, very much open to your kind of what you put forward. And then after these things take place, we can support with things during commercialization if needed. So access to investors, you can come and pitch to our investors who are less averse to space investments, let's say, than maybe the average investor. And we can support with promotions as well. Question that we get asked a lot, considering zero equity funding and so on, what's in it for us? So I think the first thing is that I mentioned, we get our budget from our 22 space agencies, ministries of science, and so on across Europe, and our hope is to deliver a return to them. That's by way of contracts signed with companies registered in those nations, but also the jobs created, revenues generated by the company, and also the added value that their actual services create as well, because they could, be selling into a different market, but they also might be selling into the home market and delivering some impact there. So socioeconomic impact is kind of the first port of call. More broadly, we want to showcase again what one of my previous slides showed, is that space technology can impact our lives in a very positive way, and in many different markets with many different user communities. So we're trying to cultivate the uptake of space technology in different markets. And then finally, to try and strengthen European industry competitiveness on both space markets and non-space markets, because we work with a lot of different companies. It's not, upstream is more, the, build, operate satellites and so on, develop. We're kind of downstream, where we work with not just satellite. We may work with some satellite operators who are vertically integrated, but we also work with lots of non-space companies who are just looking to use the technology. So strengthening European industry competitiveness as well. Now, I've mentioned about the kind of the bidding approach, where companies come to us kind of wanting support funding to build their services, but we also work with other entities who may have something to do with space, maybe not. And this is not on a kind of contracting basis. This is on a very kind of ad hoc basis at the moment, depending on what the interests of the two parties are. And this could be, we could be working with a government agency who's working on, we worked with the Government Department for Digital Culture and Media and Sport in sport in the UK. A few years ago, they had an interest in 5G applications. We were also looking at satellite 5G applications, so we did some initiatives together. Non-profits, accelerators who also are supporting, young companies in developing new services. We have these synergies. We see what we can do together. We've worked with other types of institutions, such as in the bottom there, the Cybersecurity Initiative a few years ago, where we worked with the European Network for Cybersecurity, who are interested in cybersecurity for energy networks in particular, and the European Defence Agency, European Maritime Safety Agency. We packaged all of the requirements that they'd identified into a tendering opportunity, published it, and then worked with them on selecting the proposals to support the activities to support, and their kind of interest was very much from seeing these problems solved at a broader scale, and also kind of the thought leadership of being involved in some of these cutting edge activities as well. So that's one example. We also worked with other entities who actually want to procure the solutions that are being developed, and they will actually even put in assets, like support with assets to support the activities, whether financial or non-financial, to see them made manifest. So very much there, if you're not interested as a service provider, there are a lot of ways we can actually work together to potentially see new solutions that you think are worthwhile being made manifest. Last point on this slide, we also have this, we've started establishing task forces in different domains. We have, which are kind of almost like aggregations of stakeholders in a given domain, like energy, maritime, smart cities, to actually see if we can aggregate and coordinate the user and market needs, and then again do something similar, run initiatives. So that's kind of the background of the program and what we're up to. Obviously, you guys work on emergency response, and I wanted to touch on a few cases in point rather of examples of what we have done in those areas. But this is kind of, it's all developing. We some activities are currently running, some are still yet to come, and we think it's a very exciting space. So first, Skyports. These are guys who are amazing at drones, effectively drone technology. They ran an activity during the COVID pandemic not too long ago, and they were essentially looking at how they can deliver medical supplies via drone in Scotland. So in, I think, the Highlands and Islands, I think NHS, working with the NHS, they basically wanted to see if, instead of transporting these diagnostic samples, pathology samples and so on by van, can you use their drones to do it, especially because in that region the geography has a lot of undulating terrain and island geography, and that can result in very slow and infrequent transport of medical products made worse by the pandemic. So they ran a pilot with NHS in Scotland. 11,000 hours of pathology sample transport time saved compared to using vans. About 40 huge distances traveled by the drones. I think 1,600 diagnostic samples carried from almost 1,000 patients. So pretty good activity those guys run. Telesys, so this is an activity that's currently running, and this is a really hotshot Luxembourger startup who specialize in augmented reality technology, originally for surgical applications, and now seeing how they can actually ruggedize their augmented reality solution for use in the field in different contexts, and in particular in remote locations. So the whole idea is that they want to see if you can allow to share the same point of view of a field operator with or someone operating in a remote location with a remote expert. By sharing the same point of view. So for remote care facilities that need expert support for emergency response and potentially triage support for education purposes, and the hope is that they'll improve medical outcomes by enabling remote expert support where it's otherwise not possible, and reducing miscommunications by having that same kind of point of view, and even doing things like being able to take screenshots and send back annotations and overlaying these over your field of view kind of thing. And those guys are, again, currently trying to pilot in various settings across the world, in the Czech Republic, Germany, Rwanda, Congo. And again, the whole thing is that they want to see if they can do this using satellite communications. So actually, it's a good point. I think maybe I glossed over it in the previous slide, but in this solution, these guys use satellite positioning to navigate the drones, and they had a SATCOM link as well available, just for that kind of redundancy for the command and control, which gives you a bit of additional confidence that you will be able to maintain control of the drone. These guys, comms, satellite communications, AR. Another quick example. So these guys developed what was dubbed the kind of WhatsApp of mission critical awareness, as a field team tactical awareness solution to support security or emergency teams during events, emergencies, any kind of field operation. So festivals, sports events, through to search and rescue, disaster relief, and the goal to improve the safety of in-field personnel and provide enhanced situational awareness information that makes them more effective. So things like events, proximity to nearest medical personnel facilities, or maybe detecting somebody crossing virtual borders while undertaking certain activities, and that used GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System, so satellite positioning, to track the personnel, and satellite imagery for supporting things like base maps. BeLife, so this is a transportable biological lab for in-field diagnostic capabilities, specifically for during crises and emergencies. The whole idea is to be able to bring a diagnostic capability as close as possible to crisis areas using this transportable biolab. And the reason to speed up emergency response while still ensuring the safety of deployed staff and the surrounding populations. So those guys actually deployed this during the Ebola crisis in Guinea, I believe, in 2014-15. And then more recently during the COVID-19 outbreak to run diagnostic tests. And this was kind of quite a successful activity. And in terms of space use, so they use satellite imagery to select the sites that they're going to deploy or support the selection, and potentially integrated with other types of imagery as well. And then satellite communications for remote connectivity where it's needed, and then global navigation satellite systems for potentially tracking deployments and otherwise. Last couple of examples. So these guys essentially created an integrated system for monitoring nature, in this case, a specific nature reserve, Castel Fusano Pine Forest Reserve in Italy. And they've used data gathered from drones, from sensor networks, including infrared cameras, satellite Earth observation, and in particular hyperspectral imagery, which gives you a lot of fine-grained detail about vegetation, and then essentially, yeah, use those for a sensing capability, and then cellular networks to actually communicate the data and facilitate interventions. And this was basically to support authorities in this case, preventing and detecting fires early, and potentially monitoring them as well. But they also see applications for it in generally monitoring illegal activity as well. So yeah, it was operational through 2021 during the summer, and supported one of the firefighting campaigns over there in Italy. And yeah, the space component I already mentioned, it was primarily to use satellite imagery, which allowed them to kind of look at in a bit more detail at assessing pre-fire environmental conditions. So looking at the different, let's say, vegetation indices to see if they kind of indicated that a certain area might be at risk of catching light during the heat. Be Sure, this was essentially a situational awareness tool that allows the end users to gather and share field data, and kind of share that with remote analysts. So this is everything from photo and in an integrated platform, I should say, as well. So photos from smartphones for people in the field, UAV video feeds, satellite imagery, crowdsourced data as well, and basically to support emergency response operations by trying to update maps as rapidly as possible with the most relevant data, while ensuring that they kind of create the best use of bandwidth possible. And this was essentially using global satellite positioning to geo and timestamp data collected in the field, satellite imagery for the base mapping, and occasionally SATCOM for data transmission. Last but not least, this is a drone-based surveillance solution that these guys developed to support law enforcement. And I think the idea was to see if it's feasible to detect crime using these solutions, using machine learning and whatnot. But this could also potentially be used for search and rescue cases, and again, satellite positioning to navigate the drone. So those are just a few, a drop in the barrel, let's say, of the number of applications let's say we've seen, but also expect to see. Also considering the advances being made in satellite technology itself. And again, we run a lot of funding opportunities. These are kind of the invitations to tender, but also some through direct negotiation in various domains. Some related to health, others related to other activities. But again, we're very much open to getting new ideas for solutions that will serve emergency responders, and even assess, the viability of doing so in more, let's say, fanciful use cases, let's say. And yeah, right now we have, we're open all the time for new ideas, but right now we have in particular one activity that bears some kind of relevance to this. Is to do with how space and robotics can come together to enable new solutions, and there's a health and safety component to that. So it's covering a lot of different themes, but there's a health and safety component to that, which is looking at, maybe the advances in robotics over the last few years, the advances in space over the last few years can allow for novel search and rescue support, for example, or disaster response, or looking at CBRN environments using robots, extending comms networks to remote areas in an affordable way. All of these different things that we're interested to explore, and so that's also something to consider. So that's the bulk of the presentation. I hope it was a good use of everybody's time. I am happy to answer some questions now, but also if something comes to you later, maybe when going through the slides afterwards, you can send me an email. If you want to have further details on actual activities, we can share final reports as well, if that's something of interest. But otherwise, I thank you a lot for your time. I appreciate how valuable your time is, considering the work that you all do. Yeah, happy to take some questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Christopher, for the very clear and informative presentation. I think you covered many interesting opportunities for making ideas commercially viable, always using space technologies. We will now have some time for questions. So I ask the participants if there are any questions, please type them either in the Q&A box or in the chat box. And I will read them out to Christopher, and Christopher will respond to your question. So I see already one question in the Q&A, so I will read it out. So thank you, Christopher, much appreciated. What is the range of time expected for different opportunities? For example, how long should we expect from proposal to start date for demo projects, feasibility projects, and Kickstart activities?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. And the answer is really that it depends. But I'll give you a bit more of a concrete answer. So for Kickstarts, because it's quite a short contract, it's a small contract. It's in open competition as well. There's one proposal, you send it, you get a response, and that is usually the target is to have a response within 6 weeks. So that's quite a short time to contract, and that's what that tool was devised for. That and kind of opening the doors to smaller companies as well. With feasibilities and demos, this is kind of where the it depends comes in. It depends on things like, well, the size of and scope of what you're proposing. If it's a kind of an average, okay, let's say, the size of the scope, the amount of time you take to actually complete the proposal and deal with any clarifications on our side, and also again whether it's direct negotiation or invitations or open competition. Because open competition, again, it's always the case that you just send one proposal through, it gets assessed, and it's done, and those are usually pretty rapid. Direct negotiation, there's a kind of back and forth between yourself and ourselves, to make sure that everything is kind of aligned with expectations before any contract signature, and that can get drawn out depending on any sticky points if there are issues. But I would normally say that for an average activity, assuming that there aren't any real sticky points, I would, if we talk about from proposal submission to actual contract signature, I would probably allow at least a few months. I'd probably allow at least a few months, and that's kind of if nothing, if everything runs quite smoothly. Yeah, but again, it depends. If it's direct negotiation, if it's open competition, if you're doing an enormous activity, for several million, price to ESA, we need to go through an additional process. So yeah. I hope that answers your question. It's hard to give a specific, it will take 4 months, because there are a lot of variables.
Of course, I think this is perfectly understandable by everyone, Christopher, and thank you for the answer. There are many factors when it comes from the proposal until from the proposal submission until the signature of the contract that need to be considered. And yeah, there's no one-time duration that can fit all these processes. Maybe just a follow-up from this question to get also a better idea of these projects in terms of size. Can you indicate? Can you describe, let's say, an indicative project in terms of participation and duration? Is it usually one partner applying, or could it be that it is a consortium or a collaboration between different entities? And how long can these projects run?
Yes, a really good question. So I guess there's two parts: the kind of average activity scope and duration and whatnot, and then also the kind of nature of the bidders. I'll take maybe the last one first. So the nature of the business, it's completely open. You can apply solo if you feel like you can implement the activity by yourself. That's fine. Maybe you involve external services where needed. But if you think you can implement what you've proposed by yourself, you can bid alone. And if you can, well, yeah, that's it. If you think you need additional expertise involved to deliver what you've proposed, you can involve subcontractors as well. And I would probably say that I think quite a lot of demonstration projects involve subcontractors, especially larger ones, because often it's quite difficult sometimes for a single entity to deliver a very complicated activity on their own. There's usually the need for specialized expertise. But in Kickstart activities in particular, we don't typically accept subcontractors, but you can include external services in the proposal as well. And then in terms of scope and budget, there's not a hard and fast rule on this. I think the scope has to be commensurate to what you're proposing. I think maybe the average demonstration project probably leans towards 2-year duration. In terms of budget, we see everything from like a few $100K through to several million euros. Again, it has to be commensurate to what's being proposed, and then also I think a lot of the delegations ourselves as well will look at things like, what's the return on what's being spent, and so there's those kinds of factors to consider. Yeah, I think I caught the 2 points.
Yes.
Sorry, there was one point. The feasibility studies, I think the typical duration, and you have to check through our management requirements and whether it's an open competition or direct negotiation, but this is usually either 9 or 12 months, and then kickstarts are 6 months. So when it's not direct negotiation, it's usually a bit more rigid.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Christopher. We have one more question in the Q&A box, so I will read it out. Can UK local authorities be involved in the budget for UK-based projects? If yes, are they subject to co-funding limits, or they can have a bigger co-funding coverage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we tend to deal with these cases on a case by case, but in terms of co-funding, co-funding limits are in the UK, they're typically fixed at 50% for any kind of demo project in direct negotiation or study, and this is really at the will of our delegates on that front. So that's kind of there's not really much wiggle room on co-funding there. For other entities, SMEs, for example, can get paid a bit more, up to 80% for co-funding. And then for open competition, often it will depend. It's often 80% or more, because it's being kind of driven by ESA. So in terms of UK authorities being involved, again, it depends on what kind of involvement. If they're expected to be as a subco or as an end user, or what kind of involvement they're actually anticipating. But we tend to look at these activities on a case-by-case basis. I think it's worth, on a case-by-case basis, but yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Christopher. I don't see any other questions, either in the Q&A or the chat boxes. Perhaps I will ask one last question from me, and if there are no questions afterwards, then we can continue and close the webinar. So my question is, assuming that someone has an idea and wants to check if it is relevant to the opportunities offered within this program, is it possible to receive some preliminary feedback on the concept of the project? Are there any contact points on a national level, or are there any events or someone to contact to have, a short first discussion about a potential idea and if it fits the scope of the program?
Yes, good question again. It depends again on whether it's in open competition or direct negotiation. So open competition, we can't discuss the contents of a proposal when it's accepting applications. Often open competitive tenders, there are webinars like this preceding opening of the call, where you can actually you can field those questions, get an idea of if what you're proposing fits the requirements. Once it's opened, then it's a matter of going through formal channels. In our case, that's a platform called ESA Star, where you can send the questions through, and then the response will be published on ESA Star for all to see the question and answer. For direct negotiation, we can discuss it directly. I've shared my email on this on this slide just here. So if you wanted to discuss just going through the open call for proposals, then I'm happy to have a conversation. Otherwise, yeah, my department runs a lot of events, and my colleagues go to speak at a lot of events as well. So you can always speak directly as well if to us at one of these events. But yeah, that's how it would be. So direct negotiation, you can reach out directly. One other point you mentioned as well was about, I think, local entities. So when we initiate an activity through direct negotiation, there's also this interaction with your national delegate. In the UK, that's UK Space Agency. In France, that's CNES, and so on. And so you can also to begin discussing with them if this seems like something they're interested in supporting as well, because eventually you'd need an authorization from them to proceed. And their email addresses are on our website, which is on screen here. If you click through ESA Space Solutions and then navigate to business applications, when you're looking at the kind of how to apply section, you'll see a link to the delegations emails. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Christopher. I don't see any other questions, so I could take just a couple of minutes to remind you about our upcoming webinar, and then we can close this webinar. So our next webinar is next Tuesday on the 27th of February, where we have a session of the PSAP Innovation Series, starting the first episode with the Greater Copenhagen Fire Brigade. And you can already register to this webinar on the EENA website. And last but not least, just a reminder that our annual conference takes place between the 24th and 26th of April in Valencia in Spain. And I think after this short announcement about upcoming webinars and our conference, I also don't see any other questions, so we can now close this webinar. So before closing, I would like to thank you, Christopher, for the very interesting presentation describing the Business Applications and Space Solutions program.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all.
Feel free to reach out, everybody listening.
Excellent. And thank you all for participating and being here today. The recording of the webinar and the slides will be made available on the EENA website very soon. And wishing you all a nice afternoon.